All right, use the rolling. Hi, I'm Kevin Listner. I'm an investigator at JPMorgan Chase. Gave a talk first day talking about GEOINT stuff. They said, hey, why don't you give me like the 5 useful slides out of your talk instead of all the BS that you had. So we're going to, we've got a lot of mobile devices out there running our application, and we've got a lot of customers that are voluntarily giving us latitude and longitude information. So I've been kind of tasked to take like, well, what can we use from that for counter fraud and other weirdness and stuff. So part of that thought process went through many things. But one of the key things we got was like, well, this latitude longitude signal isn't like real. It's just being provided and reported. So let's look at that weirdness and treat it just as like a signal, like we would user agents or devices or anything else that like someone else can control and modulate. So how do we get stuff out of that? So started coming up with ideas of what available signals we could extract from it. You know, so like, well, are they even sharing it, or they share it intermittently? That's kind of a useful indicator. You know, we've got like a lot of people that are security conscious, so they're like, I don't tell you ever, and then others that are, you know, compliant or whatever. The second big thing that really came out that was super interesting was like, so their IP address may indicate that they're coming from like, I don't know, Spectrum, you know, ISP provider, but yet their lat-long reported location is somewhere in China. And we were kind of trading that to a lot of like IoT proxy services that they're kind of like exploiting in China to kind of get around stuff, and then just like using this type of thing. So that's kind of visible when in this type of, you know, when you're looking at this stuff. Not something we're really taking action on. A third very common signal was just like a lot of people authenticating from the same latitude and longitude location. That, you know, is kind of like a top talker, top hot locations. It kind of plotted out some interesting places, some places that were not so interesting. That first entry, you're going to see that a lot in your data if you're collecting this kind of stuff, because that shows up in a lot of like example code for spoofing your GeoIP location for saying doing SMS and stuff. So if you search on that pattern, you'll see it. It's a pretty good indicator there's like an emulator or something going on, or somebody's goofing around. Some of those further down ones, like in the UBS Tower in Chicago and Chicago, Illinois, that's more of an artifact of you can't get GPS in the middle of this town, so you're using it for sort of location service, and they'll kind of cluster you. Like, for example, one of the GPS towers is the northeast corner, and the other one is like the southeast corner, and then that last one in Chicago is like a couple blocks down, probably a Starbucks or something. So it's just like, these aren't always bad, but that's kind of how you fill that out. So then I started looking for more stuff of not just common locations, but customers that were just coming from very stable locations. And the reason that's weird is I've got like a GPS tracking device that I'm building for a completely different project, but it feeds in here, and this is like sampled every 30 seconds, and that thing just jumps around all over the place. So a real GPS is going to not give you something stable. An interesting reason for that is there's not always the same amount of satellites to pick up on. That's variable. I didn't know that. That's new. I kind of learned this from like looking at this UAV weather forecasting thing, which, you know, says at this location at this time, the maximum number of satellites you could sync up with is this. So, cool. Then we started looking at Mantissa Fingerprinting. And what the heck's Mantissa? So Mantissa, that's just fancy words for like how many digits after the decimal point. And I spent a lot of time looking at like what's getting reported, because people were like, hey, this latitude's got 12 digits and longitude's only got 5, and, you know, can we identify chipsets or stuff based on these patterns? And, well, long story short is no. This is like, statistically speaking, there's reasons that you've got like a long, like, for example, let's go, yeah. So that first entry, you've got a lot of digits there because it's a repeating 3, and, you know, basically, if it's just a 0 or whatever, it cuts it off. So it's so don't waste any time on that one. However, locations that have like no Mantissa, those are interesting. Like that Nevada location is like in the middle of the desert. I don't know what the hell's going on there, but there's a lot of customers coming in from it, and it kind of sticks out. So, yeah. So we replaced Mantissa Fingerprinting with like massive Mantissa. And then we were like, well, what else can we do to improve this and get a more valuable signal? So I'm like, well, nobody's giving us altitude. And that's just another value that would play around with and you know, for them they have to fake or leak or whatever. And then also pulling in the number of visible satellites, because that's going to tell you, well, we can calculate the maximum, and if you're above that at that time, that's also something weird. So this is, I mean, we're using it for detecting VPNs where we don't want VPNs to be, and mainly emulators for, you know, people that are doing credential stuffing and stuff like that. So that's it. Hit me.
Alrighty, next up, Cat Suite.